Okay, for this tutorial I want to show you how to work with a quick clone. Quick clone is a really easy way of making a photograph, or in this case a digital collage, make it look more like a painting. Basically taking something like this, which is the image that I did with my zombie brush, which I talked about in the image hose tutorial, into something a little more like this, something a little more painterly. It's a very, very easy way to do. I think it's one of the strongest functions of Corel Painter. So just to make it easier, rather than working with the zombie image, I'm just going to work with a simple JPEG that I got off the internet, this cat. And what you want to do right off the bat is go to File, and you have an option of doing a quick clone, or a clone source. We'll talk about clone source later on. That's basically what you're cloning, the source of what you're cloning. If you just hit clone, it's just basically just going to give you a duplicate of this image, which is why in most cases you just want to go ahead and click quick clone, and it basically makes a duplicate image of your picture with a kind of like a sheet of, in a way, kind of like digital tracing paper on top of it. And what you want to do is come over here to brushes, and you're going to want to work with the quick cloners. Make sure that the cloners are on, and it gives you a whole set of cloning brushes to work from. I'm going to go ahead and start off with the, let's see, I'll start off with the straight cloner just to kind of show you the principle behind it. And what this is going to be doing is it's just going to be basically cloning exactly what's underneath there. Kind of boring, but I just want you to kind of understand what's going on. It's totally cloning the exact image that's underneath there. It's pulling up the color and the value and everything. With this case, it's a straight cloner, so it's not making any brush strokes or anything like that. I can turn off the tracing paper here, and you can see what I've basically painted. Not that impressive so far. So we're going to go ahead and erase that, and we're going to go to one of the more painterly brushes. One of my favorite is the Smeary Camel Cloner. I'm going to come over here, and you're just going to basically paint right on top of it. And you kind of want to watch the direction of the stroke that you're making, just like you would when you're normally painting with acrylics or oils or watercolors or whatever. And you can actually do this pretty quick. And I'll show you what it looks like without the tracing paper on. You can see basically it's just turning this into a painting. You generally want the tracing paper on though, so you can kind of see exactly what you're doing, because you can see it doesn't make a whole lot of sense if I just kind of randomly make these strokes like this versus actually following the form of the object, like actually following these stripes here, or following the shape of the arm of the animal. And just like with all the other brushes, you can turn down the opacity or the strength of this brush. You can also go to tracing paper, and not only can you turn it off and on, but you can also adjust the transparency of it. So with this one, you can barely actually kind of make out what I'm doing. In a way, you're almost like brushing on a filter, like in Photoshop you would put on like whatever watercolor filter or something like that, and unless you like select a certain area, it's going to do it to the whole thing. With this one, you're literally like brushing the filter on, which is really nice. And you can see what I've done so far. It's just a really nice, easy way of getting a very kind of painterly look to it. And obviously I'm doing this kind of quick. You can kind of take your time with it. A couple of other really nice cloner brushes there that I use quite a bit. And if you feel like you've made it look a little bit too much like a photo, you can go back with one of the brushes and kind of just paint on top of it and loosen it up a little bit. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of some of the other brushes that are, some of the other cloner brushes that are available for you to check out, and you can kind of check them out on your own. There's the watercolor brush, which is actually pretty nice. The watercolor brushes in general can kind of move really slow, so you gotta be pretty careful here. And I tend to like to do these for a nice kind of underpainting. And you can see it can really kind of slow down the computer quite a bit, because with the watercolor brushes, they literally act like watercolor, and you can see them slowly start to kind of like drip on you. I'll go ahead and turn off the tracing paper so you can kind of see what's going on. So it has a really nice effect, as almost like an underpainting. And then lots of times what I would do is, well, first of all, you can't paint on a watercolor layer. We'll talk about that in the watercolor chapter. You're going to want to go over here and to the layers and click on a new layer, because you can only paint with watercolors on watercolor paper, or the watercolor actual layer. So I'm going to go back up here and I'll get the Smeary Camel Cloner, which is one of my favorite ones. And just so I can kind of see what I'm doing, I'm going to turn the tracing paper back on, and then I'll come here and be a little more precise, because I tend to like to use the watercolor brush for very, very loose backgrounds, not a whole lot of detail going on. It tends to work whenever you kind of feel like it's getting a little bit too much, too painterly. It's like what comes to the eye. If I totally lose the eye, I can kind of go back in there and just kind of pad the paint on there. And there's all sorts of brushes that you can play around here. Some obviously looser than others, like the Van Gogh one, which is probably a little extreme. It's definitely not one of my favorite ones. You really got to turn the brush size down on some of these to really make sense. You can see it gets a little bit really crazy really quick. Kind of have to do little swirly effects to really kind of take advantage of it. And there's also a couple of so that should get you started on the quick clone. I think a really nice feature. Spray brushes, where you can basically spray on the pattern, which in some cases I think is a little bit too strong, and you can end up looking like a photograph really quick.